why all this talk of love? Why all this talk of love? Well, I mean, my basic concern here is that the relationship between businesses and brands has been a bit rocky for the last 15 years. We've been neglecting our brands. And I'm going to talk about why I think that's the case, what's the root of the problem. And there's lots of new research available, which I think enables us to examine this in detail that we've never been able to before. But I also want to focus at least as much attention on how we rebuild that love, what we need to do as marketers and as businesses to show that we cherish our brands, because they've been under attack for the last 15 years like never before, and it is crazy, let's be quite clear. So I'm going to start by hopefully just evidencing just why it was ever crazy to turn our back on the love we should have for brands. So let me just start with a timeline chart, and I could show you many of these. I have a horrible collection of these kind of horror charts. So this is data, of course, from the UK IPA database. So in many ways, these are the creme de la creme of global marketers that we're looking at here in the data. So anything that's going on amongst this bunch of marketers is probably going on even worse amongst the wider world of marketing. But you can see two distinct phases. The early part of the millennium, when perhaps marketing science was teaching us to be ever smarter with our strategic and creative and indeed media usage. We saw a very healthy growth of the kinds of effectiveness we were getting from campaigns that we were using. And this isn't just about ads, it's also about what goes behind that. A lot of these campaigns had innovation behind them and so on and so forth. And there were big media changes. But something happened in about 2006-07, and I'm going to be using research from Orlando Wood, who is in the audience here. So anyone got any tough questions on that, I'll be handing you over to Orlando. But also Dr. Karen Nelson-Fields, an Australian researcher who has done some truly fantastic work on the media implications of digital platforms, which I'm going to touch base on too. Now, both of those, I mean, in a sense, what happened in 2006-07, I will come to in just 2 seconds, but since then we've seen this astonishing decline in the level of effectiveness we see in this database and in the wider world of marketing. And I could put the 2020 data up. Don't have the very latest 2022 data just yet, but that would be interesting to look at. But I'm just going to save that, because as I go through this, it might be interesting to wonder what the 2020 data actually shows us. I'll come back to it at the back end of the presentation. There's nothing like a bit of suspense in a presentation, is there? I'll do anything for suspense. So let me get straight into it. Now, this is a quote which was shared with the world by Eric Reynolds when he was the CMO of Clorox in the US. And he refers to a tech marketer that he knew. He doesn't name him, but this is a quote. And I think in these 4 short sentences, you have everything you need to know about why we fell out of love with brands. First one, we don't have marketing run by marketers in our company. The rejection of professional marketing in large areas of the business world, particularly up the way, CFOs, CEOs, because they were being told something else. We're engineers, he says. Now, I have an engineering degree. I spent 3 years of my life in a lecture theatre, not very different from this, understanding what engineers are like, believe me, and I get this point. Engineers are often very light on emotional intelligence, shall we say. They're very good at analysis and all sorts of logical thinking, but emotional intelligence I wouldn't generally put at the top of their skills list. And there is a certain arrogance that goes with that. We work on growth, they said, as if marketers never worked on growth. But what they really meant, of course, was short-term growth. What they are about is performance marketing, the idea that we're going to put something out there and we're going to measure its effects immediately. And if we don't see immediate effects, it's a failure, and we don't give a shit about the long term, because actually what we're about is the now. That is what this is all about. And then if all of that wasn't enough, the final sneering derision of brands and brand marketing. Branding is really that emotional drizzle that you guys put on top. Now, the unfortunate thing is that kind of thinking has grown in weight and has been put to many boards of many companies around the world I'm working right now with a marketer whose boards have been given the board has been given the performance marketing cell very strongly, and who are fundamentally questioning the brand marketing that this particular CMO is doing. That's all complete idiocy, I think, because as we know, without brands, businesses are up a certain creek without a paddle. So look, I just want to start by just making a case. In a sense, you don't need me to do this, but I want to get this on the record. Now, I'm going to talk about mental availability, which I'm sure you will all be familiar with, certainly those who've studied the Ehrenberg-Bass work. So mental availability is the extent to which our brand comes to mind in purchase decisions. It's the strength of our brand in the minds of our consumers. It's not just about awareness and salience, it's also about the extent to which that brand commands the virtues of the category entry points, the things that make us want to turn to one brand or not. So it's quite complex, as Ehrenberg-Bass like to remind us regularly. Now, mental availability really matters. It matters to growth. We know that from Ehrenberg-Bass work, but it turns out that it drives all the business metrics, every single one of them. If we are not strengthening our brand, strengthening the mental availability of our brand, then we will not drive any of the 6 important business metrics that I can look at in this database. But I just want to start with the first of them, which is profit, probably the most important metric we could look at. And this chart, very simply, it takes my 600 digital era case studies that I have in this database, divides them into 3 groups. Those on the left, heavily populated by the performance marketing influenced campaigns that really did little or nothing to strengthen the brand. No large brand effects. Basket of 7 different metrics. Everything from brand awareness through to different sense of differentiation, esteem, and so on. We've got a good broad basket of metrics for the brand strength that we can look at. So on the left are the ones that did nothing for that, on the ones that are the right that did a lot to strengthen that, and the ones in the middle are the ones in the middle. And when you do that, you see a very familiar pattern that runs across the data. That if you want to drive profit, you have to be strengthening your brand and strengthening mental availability. You have to do it. And if anything, there's a kind of exponential accelerating relationship there. It really increasingly, and in many categories this is the case, that it's kind of winner takes all, or winner takes most. Now that is just one metric. Actually, it's true across the whole basket. So this is the number of shifts across all 6 business metrics: profit growth, market share growth, pricing power, penetration growth. There's 6 of these things there. They all respond to the growth of mental availability, to the extent that we build brands. Aha, say the performance marketing boys, always resourceful when it comes to arguments. They say, well, that may have been true in the early part of the millennium, but things have come on a lot since then. Data, so awesome, dude. It's all changed. So let's just look at the very latest data I've got, 2020. Now, there is no difference at all. If anything, if there is any discernible trend, and statistically speaking there is not in that data, then it is towards a strengthening of mental availability, which is actually what I would expect. Because the more businesses move online and the more businesses become digital, the more important brands are, not the less. So mental availability is certainly not losing its importance. It's getting more and more important. Aha, say a lot of people from the performance marketing world. So yeah, but you don't understand. We work in a very fast-moving, agile category here. We cannot wait for your airy-fairy brand effects to build and take effect. We have to be able to turn on a dime. So I just use this data to confront that, because we've known for decades that is just not true. So I'm going to take my same 3 groups of campaigns. Those on the left did nothing to strengthen the brand. Those on the right that did a lot. And we're going to look at the ability of those campaigns to drive, and those brands to drive, powerful short-term effects. So take advantage of opportunities, respond to threats, all of the usual things, and indeed to boost the strength, the abilities of their performance marketing even. So when you do that, same old pattern. The stronger the brand, the more we are able to be agile in a marketing sense. And like I say, we've known this for decades. This is not new news. I feel a fraud even showing it to you. But we have to show this, because we have to confront what I call performance think. Performance think isn't just about the media we choose. It's also, Orlando teaches us, about the very creative that we run. It has permeated an entire generation of marketers and their agencies, and we have to restore sense. Because the problem is not all advertising, of course, builds mental availability. And this is what I think has escaped the attention of an awful lot of the digital natives that are coming into the world of marketing and advertising. And I'm specifically thinking here about what I will call short-term sales activation generically, but it's particularly performance marketing. Would once have been perhaps called direct marketing, sales promotion as well. Now, the reality of that is that this is bottom-of-funnel communication. This is about serving those pieces of information, whether it's pricing, product details, whatever it is, that will nudge the purchase now, assuming the consumer is prepared to consider us. And, of course, that is a big if. If we're not in their consideration set, we're going to have to work damn hard, by which I usually mean throw a ton of money at them, if we want them to buy our product. Now, we know that this kind of advertising has little or no impact on mental availability, and I'm going to be showing you a truly horrifying chart from Karen Nelson Field. If any of you don't believe that now, it has almost no effect, if any, on mental availability. We just don't remember these kinds of messages. They act and work now or never. So they rely very heavily on people being in the market now for the attention that they will get. And if we are not in the market right now, which in many categories is the large majority, I mean, it could be 98% of our customers might not be in the market right now in some categories. So we ignore the majority, and we therefore only tend to get short-term sales uplifts amongst those who are in the market right now. And we have to keep reserving these messages time and time again. If we want to get long-term demand growth, we absolutely have to be in the world of brand building. We know this for sure. This is a means of operating at the top of the funnel, creating these emotional priming effects, associations that create interest and desire for our brands, whether or not we're in the market. That's their primary strength. Now, these, of course, have a very strong impact on mental availability. I'm going to be showing you an ad from a campaign that I admire hugely that has been building enormous amounts of mental availability for 20 years. It just keeps building and building and building. Get it right, and that's what you can achieve. And of course, this gives it a unique strength that you just don't get with performance marketing. That is the potential to attract the attention and the interest of all category buyers, whether they're in the market or not, assuming, of course, that our media plan supports that. And this is where Karen Nelson Field's work is going to be so important to look at, because, of course, we've been making some horrific media mistakes. So get all that right, and you get long-term sales and margin growth. Now, this is one of many problems that we face, the performance think ROI trap. Now, Les and I have been showing this chart for a number of years now. It's an old chart. My apologies. I think it's such an important one that I'm going to show it to you again. The trouble is the top drivers of profit, so this is usually annualized profit. The top drivers of profit are, of course, all the standard business metrics we would expect. Market share growth, sales gain, penetration growth, pricing power, they're all in there. But mixed in with them, in the number 4 spot, is brand strength, the number of strong brand improvements, brand metric improvements that we make with our campaign. It's a very strong correlated metric with profit. Bottom of the list are short-term kind of performance marketing results and ROI. ROI, of course, correlates with profit, but it's a different kind of metric, isn't it? It's a ratio of what we get back in terms of profit to what we invest in terms of media costs and creative costs. So there's 2 ways we can maximize a ratio. We can either do the difficult thing, which is to maximize profit growth, or we can do the easy thing, which is to minimize investment. So, of course, there's 2 ways we can do it. And it turns out that the top drivers of ROI are very, very different from the top drivers of profit. Basically, if we want to maximize ROI, we dispense with all of the fruit at the top of the tree. We go for low-hanging fruit. We go for the easy, quick wins in the market. Short-term effects. It's as simple as that. And if you look at all the important business metrics, they don't correlate significantly with ROI anyway. And the one that Ehrenberg Bass teaches us is most important to the health and growth of brands, which is penetration growth, or come to that later. We have to be constantly recruiting new customers into our brands. If anything, that negatively correlates with ROI because it's tough. It means communicating with people who don't know us, don't like us, have probably never tried us. There's no quick and easy return for that. No performance marketer is ever going to bother with that because the ROIs will look dreadful if they try and do it. And that's the horrific challenge that we have here. We've seen it. Adidas overinvested. Their public confession of this has been hugely helpful and influential. But they did it because they were driven by ROI, and it led them to overinvest in digital generally and performance marketing in particular. Now, it's very interesting just to look at what they were doing, the extent. What did that mean in terms of their media plan? And we know this from Simon Peel's wonderful admissions on this. So the 60-40 rule you may be familiar with, one of Les and my kind of outputs, that says for the average brand in the average situation, it's not a one-size-fits-all metric at all, for those who might wonder. But roughly speaking, we say 60-40 is a sensible balance between building the brand and exploiting that brand for short-term sales. Adidas were doing a 23-77 mix, wildly out, and for their brand, probably 60-40 isn't so far from it. So it was no wonder that they saw that although ROI was looking quite good, actually brand growth wasn't doing very well until they did some econometric modelling, and it taught them, rather conveniently I would say, that 65% of their sales were actually driven by brand advertising. And this, of course, is what everyone forgets. If you've never done brand advertising, I'll come to that soon, of course you can be forgiven for that. How could you know that brand advertising drives the majority of your sales? And we've seen it even more recently with the lovely Airbnb post-lockdown experience, when for one reason or another they didn't immediately resume performance marketing at the end of the lockdown, and were astonished to discover that 95% of their website traffic returned without a single dollar spent driving it in the short term. Now, I'm sure very few people in this room are remotely surprised by all of this. I'm sure I'm preaching to converted. But we cannot take any of this for granted anymore. You know, we absolutely have to keep reminding a younger generation of marketers out there and agency people of the realities of brand marketing, that it is what really mostly drives growth. Now, of course, everyone says, what about startups? We have loads of startups these days who never spend a bean on brand marketing, and they build their businesses to perfectly respectable sizes without spending a single bean. And of course that's true. And articles have been written recently all about that. And indeed, Les and my own work suggests that certainly you can get away with absolutely zero brand spend in the first year or so of your life. There is a real importance in driving trial, and performance marketing can do that very well with an innovative new product. Virality is strong. Just get it in front of people and they will probably buy it. But all businesses find that after a while, the wheels start to fall off that particular growth engine. As the competition comes in, you start to find that your costs for performance marketing start to look increasingly unhealthy. And I'm not complaining about this for a moment. I get a lot of business off the back of startups who reach this point, this inflection point, where they just can't afford to drive growth anymore with performance marketing. And somebody has said to them, you know what, you should be doing a bit of brand building. And they say, oh, what's that? And I had an interesting conversation with a Brazilian sports brand a couple of years ago. And he reached this point. He said, I just can't afford to drive growth anymore. What do I do? I said, well, you need to do some brand building. I said, have you thought about your brand? He said, well, no, not really. I said, well, how did the business start? And he said, well, we noticed that Brazilian people have slightly different body shapes to other countries, so we thought we'd build a brand for them. I said, you've got the most fantastic frigging brand here. But you've got to tell people, for heaven's sake. You're not going to take Nike on by just performance marketing. You've got to get this message out there. And I think there are lots and lots of brilliant startups that think about brand far too late in their life. You don't want to wait until years 2 or 3. You want it baked in from the beginning. And actually, you do want to be doing a little bit of brand marketing, even though you can't really afford it from day one. But there comes early growth, mature, and hopefully leadership, when you progressively need to lean into brand ever more, because brand will pick up the growth as time goes on. Now, is this all biz theory or not? Well, there is a lovely case study, which I won't dwell on, for Gusto in the UK launch, The first 5 or 6 years or so were almost entirely driven by performance marketing. And you can see what happened in 2017 there, where they trying to maintain growth because there were now 11 competitors in the marketplace. They were an early but not the first entrant in. But they found increasingly they'd reached that inflection point where just ramping up your spend on essentially short-term sales activation just simply wasn't going to drive growth anymore. So at that point, they did the smart thing. They switched to a brand plus response model, brand and activation. I'm delighted to say, not a million miles off a 60-40 kind of ratio. That's their media plan. Did it work? I wouldn't be telling you if it didn't. I mean, in the space of a little more than a year, they put on 9 share points and it took them to pretty much level playing with the brand leader. And there are scores and scores of these case studies. I chatted to 2 people in Cannes only last week, a B2B marketer and a B2C marketer, who both came up to me and said, we implemented the 60-40 model and our brand just took off. We all kind of need to bear it in mind, but we need to take it to a younger generation. Now, this leads me to Triple Jeopardy. So this is where Orlando Wood and Karen Nelson-Field and I pooled our resources to try and get this message out in Cannes. Now, essentially, this is all about what happens when you undervalue the attention you get for your advertising and therefore your brand. And that, of course, is exactly what Performance Think does. Performance Think says it doesn't really matter about broad levels of attention. All that matters is that we serve our message to people who are about to buy right now, and we nudge them to buy. So we thought, Karen Nelson-Field has great data on digital platforms. Orlando has some fantastic research on creative styles, and I have my usual bandwagon of IPA data to add into the mix. So what is Triple Jeopardy? Well, firstly, it is excessive spend on the kind of performance marketing and other forms of short-term advertising that simply doesn't build mental availability at all. So if we're raiding the brand budget, as usually happens, in order to drive this, we are taking our foot off the brand accelerator in order to simply drive short-term growth. So let's just quickly look at that. So this is, of course, IPA data. So this is by no means, we know, as starker growth as we see in the wider marketing world, where this kind of media is more than half of total spend. But we saw a doubling of typical IPA case study advertising budgets that were spent on short-term sales activation. Increasingly, of course, that was digital over that period. Note a slight tailing off at the latest couple of periods, where there was some realization, perhaps amongst blue-chip companies anyway, that we've been overcooking this short-term performance marketing thing. But that's probably not a generalized finding. That's probably only true of these kinds of businesses. But anyway, it's an encouraging sign. Come back to that later. The second part of Triple Jeopardy is Karen Nelson-Field's world, which is growing spend on advertising platforms that simply don't pull their weight in mental availability terms. So what she has looked at is enormous numbers of digital platforms and their sub-platforms, and the ability of each of those to gain our attention. And what she's found is that the same ad across different digital platforms can result in dramatically different levels of attention. Some digital platforms, and if you want to know which, you will have to pay her to consult you, for you. Some digital platforms are really bad at building mental availability because nobody pays any attention to the ads that run on them. Others are rather better. Some are improving. But it's an enormous difference. And until her research, we had no idea. We just paid on the basis of exposures. We got an eyeball, it got monetized, we paid the money, and so on and so forth. Only now are we beginning to realize that it is much, much more complex than that. And of course, this is something very radical and new in the world of media planning that we need to know. And I'm happy to say that Karen's business is going gangbusters globally at the moment as more and more global marketers realize that actually they've been sold something rather untrue by the digital platforms, that not all exposures are equal. Now here is Karen's horror chart that I mentioned up front. So this is the result of exploring attention levels, and she makes the point that attention of digital ads particularly is a very fluid thing. We flow in and out. 1 minute we're very attentive, next minute we're scrolling, next minute we're looking away. This measures the proportion of about 130,000 ads that she has researched. Some are social, some are non-social digital ads, to achieve just 2.5 seconds of attention. That's our only ask, 2.5 seconds, because that is where her research teaches us that attention memory thresholds start to kick in. We have some chance, a very small chance, of beginning to build a brand if we can keep someone's attention for 2.5 seconds. It's not a big ask. 85% of these ads didn't even make 2.5 seconds. 85%. So 15% are beginning to be able to build a brand. But again, of course, her research, because this is kind of pucker research, it doesn't take into account fraud, bots, and all of that. So you can probably halve that. I don't know, 7-8% perhaps of digital ads could possibly be seen by a human for long enough to even begin to build the brand. I mean, it just doesn't get much worse, does it? So now that we know this, of course, we can begin to review the metrics, and we won't just pay for exposures or eyeballs. We'll pay for attentive seconds, perhaps, or she's working on attention-weighted share of voice. And there will be some new currency for media buying. There has to be, because we can't go on paying for 85% of ads that nobody really usefully sees. So that's horror chart number one. There's a huge problem to fix, but she is immensely optimistic that things are going to happen quick, and I think they are. So I'm immensely optimistic. Unusual for me. So Triple Jeopardy, number 3, and this is where Orlando Wood comes in. And this is equally damaging, because you can't begin to explain the effectiveness pattern that we've already seen just by looking at any one of these 3 areas of Triple Jeopardy. They all contribute to it. But even when we are trying to do brand advertising, we're trying to build mental availability amongst consumers, even when we're doing that, it turns out we don't do it as well as we used to. We've forgotten the critical tools, techniques, and learning of the past. And so Orlando talks about left brain and right brain advertising and features. Left brain is really where performance think takes you. It's about being in your face, both literally and figuratively. It's about bottom of the funnel, closing that sale. It's about the 2 to 3 seconds that I have got to make you buy this bloody brand, or I'm going to, kick your head in. So it's very in your face. It's kind of aggressive. It's very assertive. There is no charm or seduction or brand magic being woven there. It is buy me, buy me, buy me. Right brain features are the reverse of that. They'll be familiar to those of you of a certain age, because we once did it brilliantly in this country. That seductive magic that really makes you want to carry on watching, but also makes you want to buy the brand. So here is Orlando's horror chart. And I could show you many horror charts from both Karen and Orlando. So this shows the proportion. This is basically the same break, Coronation Street break, I think, over many years, as a sampling tool, and looking at the number of left or right brain features in advertising and the ads in those breaks. And you can see, well, you don't need to tell, you can see the trend, can't you? So we're going more and more left brain and less right brain. And I'll show you some lovely right brain ads in just a sec. Now this is really worrying, because the point Orlando made is that it is the right brain features that correlate with long-term business success. They are the ones that build the brand. They are the ones that drive long-term growth. The left brain features, if we're lucky, might drive some short-term effects, but they will not really contribute very meaningfully to that. So, connect with Orlando's work, read his book, Lemon, or look out. It's full of much more detail than I'm able to give you in this short lecture. So I just want to show you 2 ads. So we've got a big challenge here. Most of the ads don't engage people, and the formats make it very difficult. Here is one brand, an American insurance company, and the first of these ads is from a couple of years ago. The second of these ads is much more recent. You can see them responding to the challenge. They obviously read Karen Nelson Field's research, and they've thought seriously about how you make brand-building digital ads for the reality, the horrific reality of most digital platforms. Let's just look at the first of them here.
Don't thank me. Thank the savings.
You can't skip this Geico ad because it's already over. Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
So it's like, how many ads do you see like that on digital? I mean, you just don't. They're vanishingly rare now. But and Karen's work teaches us that on the right platform, there is some chance that people might watch that through. But it's pretty slim. And on some platforms, forget it. They're never going to watch that through. So this is what Geico came back with more recently to solve that particular problem.
Following ad is being condensed for your viewing convenience.
Did I tell you? What's that? Switch to Geico, save a ton of money on car insurance. That's cool. So I guess 15 minutes really could save you 15% or more. Awesome. Save yourself, buddy.
Okay, I mean, I think they're great, they're brilliant, but they illustrate one thing. Well, the reason I'm showing you is not just because we needed a commercial break, but because they show how tough it is to try and build brands on digital platforms. It's really tough. This is the level you've got to operate. Creative, resourceful, it ain't easy. Don't kid yourself. It is easy. It's really tough. We've got a huge challenge because they're half the media world now, and we've got to rise to it. So those are our three things. Now, the trouble is they all add up to a particularly unwelcome reality, which is what Karen is trying to address, which is that it is getting less likely and certainly much less predictable that a dollar spent on advertising will build mental availability and so drive growth. And the problem with that is that it is undermining one of the fundamental laws of budgeting for advertising, for brands, which is the share of voice model. Now, ever since John Philip Jones formalised this 30 years ago, it's been a brilliant tool and a brilliant way to help us set budgets. And as you will know, it simply says that if we want stable market share, we need share of voice level with share of market. And any growth we get is likely to come from extra share of voice, the difference between the two. But if you think about it, that is a purely financial measure of investment, of advertising investment, and a purely financial measure of market share growth. And for that to work, it very heavily depends on both reliable and equitable values being placed on media exposures across wildly diverse media. That is to say, that the value of an exposure to the brand and its business on medium A versus the value of an exposure on medium B is fully costed in to the prices that we will pay for those two media. And that was, broadly speaking, crudely speaking, true right up till the digital revolution, when the walled gardens of the big digital platforms broke the feedback loop that kind of fed this model. And so we've now got a situation where the money is not chasing effectiveness. Karen is quite clear about this. It's not, the money doesn't even nearly chase effectiveness when it comes to digital platforms. It's so out of line that she's horrified. That's why her business is growing so fast. But from my point of view, it has resulted in a rather unfortunate and rather uncomfortable reality. So I'm going to show you, this is a simple chart. It shows the correlation between extra share of voice and market share growth, the John Philip Jones relationship that's been solid for many, many years. And this is how it's played out. So growing, strengthening in the first part of the millennium. It reached its peak about probably 06, 07, when it was easily significant at the 99% level. It was a banker of a relationship. You could absolutely put your money on it. Since then, it's lost enormous amounts of that. I won't even tell you what the level of significance of that relationship is now. It is not a banker relationship anymore. And that is down in large measure to the fact that money is not chasing effectiveness, but it's also exacerbated by Orlando's observations about brands. So how do we show our love for brands? How do we fix these problems? Well, of course, it's by building mental availability. I just want to quickly run through a few rules that we know from not just my work, but the work of others, including Orlando's, for how we put this right. So the first of those is about aiming for fame. So this is about moving our brands along a spectrum from mere awareness, and we know mere awareness is not good enough for big brands, scale brands. Okay for a startup, but scale brands, as Ehrenberg Bass teaches, need more than simple awareness. So that's where we've heard of the brand. We will passively accept it. We need to go beyond that to salience, where it starts to come easily to mind, and we may start to actively seek it. So we become much more mentally available at that level. But then there is this wonderful level that we call fame. And fame is where we get the brand talked about. What we're doing in terms of advertising and marketing is really shaking the category up. We get talked about with a brand that is making waves. And we get what psychologists will refer to as cognitive ease, which is a fancy way of saying it's a no-brainer choice. If everyone's talking about this brand, it's got to be good. I don't have to think about it. It's got to be good. And, of course, we get the whole influence and advocacy that comes from hearing about that brand through multiple sources. And we get increasing returns as we go along that. So what drives fame? And this is the important thing, because, unfortunately, it doesn't look good for performance marketing. What drives fame, and this is a study where we fused Unruly's database with the IPA database. We had about 60 campaigns that they had these interesting response metrics for. And we're looking at the correlation with fame effects from my database. So you can see basically those are all different flavors of surprise. Shock, surprise, amazement, disgust, negative surprise, usually resolved positively. They are all reflections of surprise, doing something consumers didn't expect you to do, something unusual in your category. Hilarity, humor. Orlando talks a lot about the importance of humor. Good jokes, good humor always has some kind of punchline, otherwise it isn't a good joke. So it's surprising. So you summarize those all as surprise. Those are the top 5 metrics that correlate with fame. It's a pretty easy lesson to draw. The 17th of 18 that in my correlation analysis was very simply knowledge. So the currency of performance marketing, it negatively correlates with fame. People don't shout about interesting facts. They share and shout about cool content, something weird and surprising. So let me show you. This is one, I mentioned this earlier, Specsavers. I admire them hugely as a business. They've been doing this, really, for 20 years now. This is their latest ad, if you haven't already seen it. They've just picked up, well, they didn't pick up a prize. I would have given them a prize, but they're out of doors. A lovely out-of-door ad that was shortlisted at Cannes. Sadly, didn't make a prize. I think it should have got at least a bronze, if not a silver, but who am I? Anyway, this is their latest TV ad. Isn't this just brilliant? They've been able to do this for so long because they've got such a great idea for their brand.
What? Sorry, mate.
Look, Terry.
Delivery.
This says block 2. It's over there, mate.
It makes them a talking point. I mean, some of the ads are stronger than others, but it's just brilliant. And you can do it year in, year out if you get your thinking right. And it's been hugely successful over many years. Right, number 2, distinctiveness. Now, of course, the language of performance marketing is differentiation. It's about points of difference, those key facts that will nudge people over the line. It's not about being distinctive. In fact, you probably don't want to be too distinctive in performance marketing. But distinctiveness, as we know from the work of the Aaron Bass and here as well, is the biggest driver of long-term growth. About 7 times as effective as campaigns that try and establish a point of difference. Now, and the main tool, of course, of distinctiveness, if we're not going to use facts and information, we're going to have to use emotions. And we've known, of course, for many years, and Orlando's work absolutely supports this, that emotional campaigns are dramatically more effective than ones that seek to drive growth through pieces of information. And the multiplier there is getting on for 5 to 1. If we take it to the next level, which is fame, where we don't just make people feel good about our brand, but want to share that, we take it to an order of magnitude. These are fantastically effective campaigns, fame ones, but of course they're very, very difficult to pull off. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Now, since we're talking about emotions, I just want to take a slight aside because it's quite clear that the emotional makeup of successful brands has been changing over the years. And a lot of the work the Advertising Association have done about trust, of course, will have underscored this. And I think most marketers that I work with are certainly concerned about trust, not just of advertising, but of their brands. And we see this in the IPA data. So we've got 7 brand metrics there, and we can look at their link, their correlation with profit growth over time. I'm not going to show you the trends in all of them. I'm just going to show you the trends in trust. And for many years, Les and I, when we did this kind of analysis, we thought, well, trust isn't very important, is it? But look what's changed in recent years. It's now the number 2 brand metric in terms of its strength of relationship with profit. behind only quality perceptions, which I think you would expect to be the number one. It's grown. It's getting really important. So trust, how do we build trust? And there's two issues that I just want to draw to your attention. And the first of those is that not all media choices appear to build trust. Some do, some don't. So this is a very simple analysis. All I've done is I divided in fact, this is 200 case studies, because we can only do this from 2014 onwards. I've divided my 200 case studies into two piles, those that did build strong trust effects and those that did not. And I've just looked at what proportion of the budgets was spent on different media. So, for instance, TV. You can see there that brands that did create strong trust effects were more likely to spend more on TV than those that didn't. So we can conclude from that probably TV supports the building of trust. I mean, it's not conclusive, but it's a suggestion. Press, similarly, online display and search all generally seem to support trust. But when it comes to online video, and particularly social video, there is clearly the reverse pattern. There are clearly issues about social platforms and the kinds of truths, shall we say, that we regularly see, particularly on social video, that are undermining that medium as a dispenser of advertising trust. So there is an issue with media that we need to be aware of. And I'm not suggesting this is proof positive, but at least it would raise a question mark in my mind about whether, if I put an ad on social video as opposed to some other more trusted medium, whether it would give me the same impact on trust. The answer is perhaps it wouldn't. But there's another issue, which is to do with brand purpose. Now, I'm not going to try and sell you brand purpose here and now, and nor should I, because brand purpose is not a tool for all brands, and I've never said that, and I don't think anyone sensible would think that. But for the right brand, it happens to be a very good tool for building trust, certainly, and indeed building business success, if you know how to work with it. And of course, Unilever, I guess, are the past masters at this, so we should look to their brands. And yes, I am a fan of Hellmann's and food waste. I think it's a very, very good brand purpose for that kind of product. But here we are. Let's just look at the impacts on trust and image of per brand purpose cases versus those that didn't use brand purpose. And you can see some really useful, so image is more the kind of emotional baggage that brands carry. That's what the metric means. Trust is very specific. So you can see that brand purpose can have quite powerful effects on two quite important metrics, particularly trust. But that isn't the end of it. It has impacts across other stakeholders, really, particularly the supply chain, particularly investors, and most importantly, amongst employees. Employees like working for purposeful companies, and that is, of course, immensely valuable when we have labour shortages, as we do at the moment. So let's keep moving on. Creativity. You know my story on this. It was once hugely influential. Now, this has become a little tarnished recently. I think shows like Cannes were giving out creative awards to the wrong kind of campaigns. But if we look back at 20 years, we still see about a 10-to-1 multiplier. I'm happy to say that if you look at the winners of Cannes last week, there is a refreshing and reassuring growth of the kinds of campaigns that I would like and approve of, and I think Orlando would as well. And I'll show you one later on. Consistency. Performance marketing is not interested in consistency. Performance marketing is in constantly churning messages. That's what we're taught. But consistency is good for brand building. Fluent devices, such as characters, these ones you'll recognise. Or there can be organising ideas, like the one we've just seen, Specsavers, Snickers. These drive growth. Some years ago, I did a project with Orlando again, where we looked at the business effectiveness, and here we're just looking at two metrics, market share and profit, where we compared campaigns that had these kinds of consistent devices with those that didn't. And the uplift is around about 30%. Now, I wanted to give you one example, and this I'm very happy to say picked up silver at Cannes the other day. I think this embodies many of the virtues that I'm talking about. There is distinctive assets, there is a consistency in this campaign, there is certainly a fluent device in this campaign. It's humorous, that's a rarity these days, and it kind of ticks all my boxes. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, enjoy.
You know, It doesn't matter if you choose left or right, because they're both chewy, crunchy, and delicious.
You know, it doesn't matter if you choose left or right, because they're both chewy, crunchy, and delicious. You know what else I like?
No, what?
The sound of the snap.
When you bite into it.
It's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. Now, I mean, in the early days of Twix, I was a bit underwhelmed by it. I thought it was a bit worthy, but these guys have found their pace now, haven't they? It's lovely. Absolutely lovely. Mars, well done. 11 out of 10. But this is not performance thing. This is not what I and Orlando and Karen have been railing against. This is good, time-honoured brand building. New customers, you don't need me to go on about this. Ehrenberg Bass, Basic Law of Growth. If you haven't read this 1,000 times, then I'm sure Byron has told you this 1,000 times. We have to reach out to new customers all the time if we want to drive growth. It's not an option. It's an absolute necessity and mandate. But of course, we can't take this for granted because performance marketers have been telling us that's old-fashioned thinking. What we do is we use digital data here just to serve our advertising message to anyone who's in the market at once. Two answers to that. So this is 2020 data, very latest data I've been looking at, and we're just comparing two uses for data, just to prove to you that I'm not anti-big data. I'm not anti-big data at all. All depends how you use it. So I'm looking at those who used it for targeting, that is, smart-ass targeting of the sort that performance marketing absolutely loves, versus those that used it for other purposes, insight, effectiveness, feedback, and all of that. And it's quite interesting, the finding. So the metric on the left, this particular metric, using data for targeting, that's a really bad result, believe me. They don't come much worse than that in a database of success stories. Use data for other purposes, that is a very healthy metric. It does contribute to growth and success, using data wisely. Another way I want to look at it is we can look at the brand effects that we get from that, because there's been a lot of talk in recent years about one-to-one at scale or mass customization and this being a great way forward. Well, the omens are not great, to put it mildly. So this just simply looks at the impact on brand of using data for targeting, and there could be many reasons for this. But I mean, the one most obvious one is that if you're sending different messages to different consumers, you end up with a dog's breakfast of a brand. And that's not good news, even if you're in the dog food market, believe me, absolutely not. So this is no substitute for brand building. It's an interesting intellectual exercise, but actually there's more and more data emerging that it's not the smart way forward. And then there's a bit about balance, which you all know, 60-40. It comes from a very simple observation that if you look at the effectiveness curve and how it responds to how, as you rebalance your budget, so all short-term on the left, all long-term on the right, there is a clear peak in that curve when you typically hit about 60-40 brand versus activation. It is not a one-size-fits-all model. We've never said that, but that's just a kind of average and a start point. It varies hugely. If you go down the old-fashioned route and you put it all into brand, yes, there is a loss of effectiveness, but of course you can put that right at a moment's notice by dialing up your investment in short-term marketing. The bigger mistake of case to make is the one which so many brands do, which is to go all short-term, in which case you have a much bigger loss of effectiveness. And there's no quick fix. It'll take you at least a year probably to build that brand back. So it's probably time I wrap. So I want to end, unusually for me, with some kind of good news, something to feel cheerful about. So let's do two things. First of all, let's go back to that chart. And I should say, I've already said to you, Karen Nelson-Field is wildly optimistic that she's going to be able to fix the digital platform problem. Orlando is much less optimistic about how much and how long it's going to take to fix the creative one, and I'm with him on that. The creative problem is a much more difficult fix to make, but at least we've got a bit of optimism. So who thinks that the 2020 data showed an improvement versus a decline? So improvement first, quick show of hands. Who thinks it's an improvement? Yeah, about 60%. Who thinks it's going to be more decline? Yeah, not quite 40% anyway. Well, the good news is, at least amongst these blue-chip marketers, but not probably in the wider world of marketing, there was, for the first time, an improving trend. And there are two interesting observations I'm going to make about that that are not made by that chart. Firstly, this was the first period where we saw a reversal of the trend to short-term thinking. All of the short-term metrics, percentage of budget spent, time spans over which effectiveness were measured, all started to return to something more sensible. But there's another one, which I'm totally delighted about, which is for the first time in this run of data, the share of budget that social media took fell amongst this bunch of campaigns. I'm not saying social media doesn't have a good place in campaigns, but we were spending far too much on it, and that's the simple finding. So that's good news number one. And secondly, I just want to play you an ad that picked up 2 silvers at Cannes. And I love it in so many ways. But if Cannes is now giving silvers to these kinds of awards, then at least we're beginning to turn the creative corner. So enjoy this one, and we'll go to Q&A afterwards.
Hi, and welcome to this very natural setting. Today, I want to talk about a revolutionary approach on how to connect our world without being super weird. Some said it's not possible. Some said it's out of reach. To them, we say it's already here. Seriously, look, it's right here. And what do we call this not-so-new chapter in human connectivity? The Icelandverse. Enhanced, actual reality without silly-looking headsets. In the Icelandverse, there's real moss you can look at, but please don't touch. It's very delicate. Skies you can see with your eyeballs. Volcanic rocks you can caress. Really big geysers you can observe from a safe distance. Horses you can ride, with hair you can touch. The Icelandverse is a world with possibilities so endless, they'll be here forever. So join us today, or tomorrow, or whenever. We are really easygoing. Now, please enjoy our logo.
Am I just being mischievous? Mark Zuckerberg tweeted his desire to go and see Iceland after that. So look, if we can poke fun, and Cannes, of course, was full of the metaverse. You couldn't escape it. If we can, at last, if we've got big, powerful creative campaigns taking the mickey out of it, I feel there is some hope for the future of advertising. So as the Icelanders would say, tack. Thank you very much for listening, and probably time for some questions.